Hi everyone, I'm back again. And today I'm going to be doing the Synastry chart between Elvis Presley and Priscilla. One of my viewers had commented saying that she thought that maybe Elvis was pressured into marrying Priscilla. But after going over this chart, I can tell you that a lot of this, there is so much fate and destiny. So I'm going to get started. His vertex conjuncts her point of fortune, and that is a very strong indication of fate. Her point of fortune conjuncts his south node, and that has to do with a past life connection. So these two together really signify a very fated bond, and also it's almost like a cosmic contract in a way. I think it's like they knew each other in a past life and they came together into this life to solve and to work through some karmic issues between the two of them. His Sirius conjuncts her point of fortune, and her Sirius conjuncts his point of fortune at 2 degrees. This is a very tight orb. I've never seen a double whammy before where there's Sirius conjuncting each other's point of fortune. And Sirius is a love asteroid, and it has to do with a love that's unconditional. And the point of fortune is like a mini Jupiter, so it magnifies these energies. Her Juno conjuncts his south node and vertex at 1 degree. And Juno has to do with marriage. So not only is it conjuncting his vertex, it's conjuncting his south node as well. So there is definite, if I didn't know them and I was doing this chart, I would say there is definitely going to be a marriage. Also conjuncting his south node is her snow asteroid. And snow has to do with drugs. Typically, it has to do with cocaine, but it can also mean amphetamines, prescription pills. It encompasses that whole area of substance abuse. So she did drugs while they were in this relationship together. And since it's conjuncting his south node, he didn't find anything wrong with this, because whatever conjuncts your south node from the other person, they will either be in denial about it or they will accept this energy, and it will be, okay, that's just the way it is. So there were drugs involved actually between the two of them. Her Elvis and Saturn conjuncts her Elvis and Saturn conjuncts her descendant natally. This is fascinating to me, because whatever conjuncts your descendant in your natal chart, that's the energies that you will be looking for in a relationship, or what will happen, or what will be attracted towards you. So in this case, her Elvis, PNA, and Saturn. Saturn has to do with commitment, and Saturn rules father time. So now she's looking for a committed relationship, and there was an age difference between the two of them, and that's what Saturn represents, and it's holding hands with Elvis. Fascinating. On the cusp of her 7th house, which rules committed relationships. Now, her Jupiter conjuncts his Caputo, 2 degrees, and Caputo is sweet-talking ladies' man, and Jupiter magnifies these energies. But Caputo can also mean infidelity, and there are many instances of his cheating on her behind her back. Her Casanova and Lysistrata conjuncts his Lilith, and his Leto conjuncts her Lilith. Lilith has to do with raw sexuality. So I'm going to break this down for you, because these two aspects together really are important, because her Casanova and Lysistrata is conjuncting his Lilith, and Casanova has to do with infidelity and cheating. Lysistrata has to do with sexual manipulation, a sort of power control or withholding sex. So there's this, it's actually a manipulation when it comes to the sexual involvement between two people. and his Leto conjuncts her Lilith. Now, Leto traditionally has to do with murder or death, but in this case, there was no sex after a while. Killed the sexuality between the two of them and the intimacy. And most of it happened after Lisa was born, because there are reports that he couldn't make love to a woman once she had children. But also validated by this is her Saturn squares his Mars in Libra. And Mars and Libra, they take forever to make up their minds about something. They're not very ambitious when it comes to certain things. People have to push them to do something. And her Saturn is squaring his Mars. So here we have Mars, the sexual planet, the lower octave of Pluto, and Saturn. It puts a binding or a chilling effect. And it took forever for him to finally decide not only one, to have sex with her and to make it complete. I think took a long time, and to get married. Now his Priscilla conjuncts his ascendant and her Venusia. Again, this is very fated, and there's like destiny involved here, because his Priscilla is conjuncting his ascendant and her Elvis is conjuncting her descendant. Two very important angles in a synastry chart. So his Priscilla not only conjuncts his ascendant, but it's conjuncting her Venusia. And Venusia has to do with the ideal woman. So he thought that she was the ideal woman for him. Fascinating. Lots of PNAs in this synastry chart between the two. This is like the karmic union of the century, really. His Elvis and point of fortune conjuncts her midheaven at 0 degrees. So now we have his PNA Elvis and his point of fortune sitting right at the top of her midheaven, and the whole world can see this union between the two of them, the fortunate circumstances surrounding the fact that she was able to be with the king of rock and roll. Her union and groom conjuncts his Elvis. So again, I always get goosebumps when I go over the PNAs, because whenever they come in a synastry chart with so many aspects between the two of them, it's definitely, it's written beforehand. I think that they knew each other in a past life, and I think this was the agreement before they came here. So her union and groom. Union has to do with marriage and a togetherness, and it's holding hands with groom, and it's conjuncting his Elvis. So he is going to be her groom. This is really fascinating as well, too. There's so many asteroids here conjuncting her moon by him that I couldn't even believe it. I don't think I've seen so many. His Posh union, Fortuna, Melpomene, Eternatus, Pinocchio, Karma, and Dejanira conjuncts her moon. Wow. I have said so many times, when you are looking at your compatibility chart, that you don't want negative asteroids conjuncting your moon from the other person. You only want the good stuff. Now, in this case, it's a mixed bag. But all of these energies came into play in their relationship. So I'm going to break it down. His Posh and Union are holding hands, and that signifies a very lavish lifestyle in the marriage between the two of them. Fortuna is there as well. Very fortunate circumstances. Melpomene, that has to do with tragedy. So he did bring tragedy into their relationship. Even though they were divorced and they went their separate ways, it doesn't mean that the synastry chart will stop, the energy will stop playing out, because they also had Lisa at the time, and they still loved each other, and that bond was not broken. So Melpomene has to do with tragedy, and also there is Eternatus. He will always be there for her. He will always love her no matter what. And Dejanira is there. Now, when Dejanira is conjuncting your moon from the other person, this doesn't necessarily mean that you will be a victim. It can be. And in her case, there were certain circumstances. But Dejanira conjuncting the moon can also mean that the moon person will be very sympathetic towards the Dejanira person. They're aware of them being a victim. So she was aware of and sympathized with Elvis and his demons and she understood everything that was going on. She was very sympathetic and she tried to help him. And that's the energy that the moon has when Dejanira makes a conjunction. Also, there's Pinocchio. So he was not a very good liar. I mean, she could see through him, and she always had this suspicion that he was lying to her, and he wasn't very good at it, and she caught him in lies. Fascinating. All these asteroids together. Now, his Jupiter conjuncts her Ishtar at 0 degrees. Ishtar has to do with blow-ups and arguments. Huge arguments between these two, which is validated by the next aspect because his Pholus and Icarus conjuncts her South Node. Pholus explosions and blow-ups because it's holding hands with Icarus, which has to do with rash and impulsive behavior. So behind the scenes, he blew up, they had huge arguments, and since, like I said, it's conjuncting her South Node, so that energy, she blamed it on herself, or she was in denial about it, and maybe it had to do with his drug abuse, and the fact that, like I said before, his inner demons. So she went along, she was not happy about this, she blamed it on herself, but she kind of accepted it as part of the marriage. And since his Pholus is conjuncting her Hemingway, that means that eventually she wrote a book about this whole relationship. Her Zeus and Pholus conjuncts his Mercury 1 degree. Zeus has to do with cheating. Now, Pholus is holding hands with Zeus. So in this case, her Pholus conjuncting his Mercury, this is an explosion of talking. They like to talk. Hours on end, lots of talking and talking, but Zeus is there. So this to me signifies that a lot of their long conversations possibly centered around cheating and infidelity. And Mercury has to do with, like I said, talking, thinking, and writing. So there was a lot of writing, a lot of love letters between the two of them. Now you have to go back, this was like early 60s to the middle of in the 60s, and there were no cell phones back then. So if he wasn't available, there would have to be letter writing. But there was also letter writing involving infidelity and cheating of some sort. So that's how the energies of this aspect, that's what this signifies. Now in his natal chart, his Venus conjuncts his North Node and anti-vertex. This is very telling as well because whatever conjuncts your North Node is one of the themes in your life. And since Venus is conjuncting his North Node and his anti-vertex, which means whatever conjuncts your anti-vertex, this is what you'll bring to other people. These are the energies that you will bring. So in his lifetime, he brought a lot of love to his fans, to the women that he was involved with, and he was a giver. So this is fascinating as well. I just had to throw that in there because you have to understand when you're doing a synastry chart what each person, the energies in their natal chart and where they're coming from. Now, her blow conjuncts his moon. And blow has to do with failures and mistakes, but in this instance, it has to do with the drugs, because blow can also signify cocaine or amphetamines. And that goes back to her snow conjuncting his South Node. Now, his Uranus conjuncts her IC. and Uranus conjuncting your IC from the other person, that sits right on the cusp of the fourth house that rules the home and the family. So there's a lot of instability in the relationship. You never know what to expect. It could be blow-ups or surprises, and just it's not a very smooth sailing sort of energy when you have Uranus conjuncting your IC. But this is also validated by the energies and aspects that I talked about before. So this is all coming together in a way that it's all starting to make sense. His Uranus in Councilman conjuncts her nemesis at 1 degree. And his Uranus in Councilman, that has to do with lawyers. And all of a sudden there was a divorce. And it's conjuncting her nemesis. This has to do with betrayal. So this signifies to me that all of a sudden they were getting a divorce. It happened, and it was because of betrayal, because Councilman is there. Now, his Nessus and Dolores conjuncts her Venus in Saga. Nessus has to do with abuse, and Dolores has to do with pain and suffering. Now, it's conjuncting her Venus, which is a love planet. So in this relationship, there was abuse, and there was a lot of tears and crying, that she was exposed to the abuse, and there was so much suffering and crying and tears over this relationship. And her Venus is holding hands with Saga. So this is it's like a long story between the two of them, and with so many twists and turns. And Saga can also mean a soulmate connection, which makes sense to me because she met him when she was very young. Now, her Uranus in Lust and Goldfinger and Hypnos conjuncts his Descendant and Saga. So again, Saga is here. Very long story between the two of them. Now, her Uranus is conjuncting his Descendant. So he found her very fascinating and unusual and just exciting. And her Lust is conjuncting his Descendant as well. So that's self-explanatory. She really desired him. Her Goldfinger is there. And this can sometimes mean that she was a gold digger. But in this case, I don't think that's true at all, because there's so many asteroids here that signify that she really did love him, especially with her Ceres conjuncting his point of fortune. That's unconditional love. So she had unconditional love for him. But the Goldfinger in this aspect signifies that she got a lot of money out of this relationship, lots and lots of money. And her Hypnos is conjuncting his Descendant as well. So she had a very strong hypnotic effect on him, and with a very long story. Now, his Chiron, Tyche, and Xanthopy conjuncts her Sun at 2 degrees. And the Sun is a very important luminary in a synastry chart. Now, these energies I'm going to explain to you may sound a little bit redundant because it validates a lot of the aspects that I've already went over. Chiron conjuncting her Sun, that has to do with pain. So she experienced a lot of pain in this relationship through abuse, because that's what Xanthopy represents. Now, Tyche is conjuncting her Sun. So he brought a lot of money into this relationship, and unfortunately there was blow-ups, arguments, cheating, pain, domestic abuse, because also his Sedna conjuncts her Mars, 2 degrees, and Sedna has to do with betrayal, and Mars is a war planet, fire and power, so arguments over these indiscretions and infidelity of his. Now, her Dejanira and Bacchus conjuncts his IC at 0 degrees. So she brought a lot of overindulgence into this relationship. Maybe she spent too much money, but she didn't do things lightly. This was not like, going to the store and buying one purse. This is like going to the store and overdoing it and maxing out your credit card. And her Dejanira is conjuncting his IC too. So there's victimhood in this relationship. Definitely in this situation. Or conjuncting the IC, victimhood. But that's pretty much self-explanatory. It's not something that's, new or shocking, I should say. But this next part, this final aspect that I'm doing is actually really shocking to me because in his natal chart, his Humpty Dumpty and Melancholia conjuncts his ascendant. Whatever conjuncts your ascendant in your natal chart, this is an energy that other people will see and it will eventually play out. And Humpty Dumpty conjuncting his ascendant, this is like a fall from grace. You know how the poem goes. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So towards the end of his life, there was a fall from grace and melancholy is there. So there's this a sort of sadness and feeling depressed and going off and being by yourself, and there's melancholy and sadness, and then he eventually suffered this fall from grace. But after he died, everybody will still remember him for the king of rock and roll. So that's all I have today. I hope you enjoyed this interpretation, and please hit the subscribe button and like, and I will be back shortly. Have a nice day.